So I said there were 7 design concepts, and we've looked at the first 3, and now let's look at the last 4. And these 4 I've actually grouped together in what I call the big 4, and they are contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Okay, let's begin with contrast. Now, I think contrast is actually the most important of the 4, and you can achieve contrast in many different ways. For example, black and white, color, size, and shape. But contrast is really about difference and showing difference, and we don't want to just show a little difference, we often want to show a big difference. Okay, let's look at these first set of slides. And the first one here, the blue one, the blue background, you'll notice that the text really doesn't stand out. The text is white, but the background is kind of white, so there's just weak contrast, right? If you look at the next one, you'll see that the text is white and also larger, and the background is very different than white. It's almost black. It's a very, very dark gradient. So that's one. Color was used to achieve contrast, but also size. You'll notice that we wanted to draw attention using contrast, let's say to the word big, so it's much bigger, and also it's bled off the page a little bit, which is sort of interesting, and it's another way to draw attention via contrast. Okay, this example is a little bit different, because if you look at this first slide, you actually can understand the graphic and you can see it, but it takes more work to see it because the background template has a lot of elements that aren't necessary. Again, these are noisy, right? But we could also say this has weak contrast because the background has too much salience. And as you can see, it's hard to see the word rate, for example, in the title, and there's just a lot of noise. It makes it harder to see the text. In the different treatment of the same data, it's just very, very easy. And even though this background does have some patterns on them, they're very, very subtle. So the contrast between the foreground and the background is really good. And of course, the text is white, the background is almost black, and it's very, very easy to see. Also, we've used color as a contrast technique because we want people to notice South Korea. That's where we want you to look, and that's where your eye is going to go because it's red and the other bars are gray. So the whole idea behind contrast is that it's a great concept and a great technique that you can use to achieve very powerful and very clear images. It doesn't matter how many you use. You don't have to use many different techniques like big and small, different shapes and so on. But if you use 1 or 2, it can be very powerful and effective. So the second concept is repetition. And repetition is very simple. It just means that you repeat certain design elements throughout your design, in our case throughout the slide deck. Now, the thing is with PowerPoint or Keynote, many elements are already built in. For example, when you choose a template, it will have the same background color, the same kinds of fonts, the same color font, and so on. But that is repetition, but that can get a little boring as well. So we're talking about taking it even a step further. And you might have certain elements that are repeated, not in every slide, but are repeated in just certain slides in a way that fit the theme. For example, in this video, you may have noticed as the concepts have been introduced, there has been one design element that has been repeated. And the reason that we do that is to bring the sections together in a sort of a unified whole. The next design principle is alignment, and the whole idea behind alignment is that nothing should seem accidental or random on your slide. Elements are connected in some way, and that's through alignment. It's best to explain this principle by actually looking at an example. So take a look at these slides here. Now, this is an example of a title slide, and you'll notice usually we centered things, or you might flush to the left. But in this case, we've flushed all the text to the right, and you can see the main title, the subtitle, the name, and then the logo are all lined up on the right, and this forms an invisible line, vertical line, running along the right side. Here's another example, returning to the Hare Hachibu slide. Now, in this case, the text isn't exactly aligned with the eyes, but it's aligned in such a way that, although again, we're not conscious of it, but the eyes and the text sort of go together. So it sort of flows naturally. The next concept is called proximity, and the idea behind proximity is that elements that are related should be closer together and things which are not related should be further apart. Elements that are close together, the audience is going to assume that they're somehow related. And if they're not, then they should be at a greater distance. And again, it's best to explain this with a simple example. So look at this title slide here. You can see 4 text elements plus a logo. And in this case, it's really hard to tell which is more important, right? We see principles of presentation design. The second line is actually a subtitle, and then there's the name and his position. But it's not really clear which is more important than the other. In this example, the second example, it's very, very clear. So the first 2 lines of text are close together because they're more related. It's the title, the main part of the title, and then the subtitle. And then down below is the name. So the name and the gentleman's position, those are together. And the logo, again, is separated because that's the third element. So now we see there's actually 3 elements, not 5 elements. So when I look at this slide, the main problem is I just can't read the text. So how could we improve this? And in this slide, this is the title slide, and here there are 2 things. The first thing is proximity. Before the text was far apart. In this case, it's really come together as 2 text elements. It's the title with the subtitle in close proximity, and then the name, which is very separate, so it's further away. And then the idea of contrast. So now the background behind the text is almost black, which contrasts very well with the white, and then the photograph below eases in, and it's another element which draws us in. So remember, these design concepts are not hard and fast rules. They're simply guides, and not every concept will apply to every slide or every visual. If you want more examples, you can look at my book where I do highlight all of the concepts and others as well.